There's a lot to be said about the Steelers' decision to keep Matt Canada at offensive coordinator, but in continuing that conversation, there's some assertions that say, do they even care? Are they actually trying? We're going to talk about that because that was a point made by some out there. But our guy Joe Starkey at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette wrote an impassioned column about that very issue recently. I want to talk to him about that and what he sees in Kenny Pickett versus a lot of these quarterbacks we're seeing in the NFL playoffs right now. All that right here on the North Shore Drive from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm your host, Kris Carter. Let's get into it. You are now listening to the North Shore Drive podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter. And welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast here from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm Kris Carter. Today, joined by Joe Starkey, one of our legendary column writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. You can also hear him at 93.7 The Fan. As always, when you can check out this show out on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, especially on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of our daily content here from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. The North Shore Drive podcast airs Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. We're here at the Wednesday edition. Joe, how you doing?
Good, Kris. I love this show, and I'm honored to be on.
Well, we're honored to have you here for the first time since I've been able to take over. So
Ron would never come on this show.
Well, maybe we got to get that to change at some point. But Joe, I wanted to pick at your column that you wrote last week, and that was just about addressing things about the Matt Canada decision, because we actually had a show about that on the show with our friend Josh Roundtree from 93.7, and he was saying, you know what, if this decision is from the Rooneys saying that if they just don't want to spend more money or lose the money that they already paid on Matt Canada's contract, then shame on them for doing that. And your point is you may disagree, people may disagree with Matt Canada, but at the same time, can you doubt the Steelers' efforts to put forward a winning franchise? I agree with that sentiment, and I think that you're onto something here, that the Steelers may see something that we all don't, but it doesn't mean that they're not putting their best foot forward to be a winning team.
I mean, unless I'm radically missing something here, Matt Canada has 1 year left on his deal at about, I don't know, let's say $1 million. It's not much more. It couldn't be much more than that.
Right.
So if logic holds, the people who believe that the contract, the fact that he signed for another year, plays a role in this, I would ask them, do you honestly believe that if the Steelers had a doubt about Matt Canada, that they would let his contract status supersede that doubt? An NFL franchise that for whatever criticism we want to levy against them in recent years, absolutely and inarguably puts winning at the top of its priority list. If you don't believe that, if you believe this was at all about Matt Canada's contract, then you don't believe that the Steelers have winning as their top priority. I just refuse to believe that they would put a piddling little, is piddling a word, Kris? I don't know. A piddly little salary for Matt Canada above winning. If they thought this guy was not the guy, they would get rid of him in a second. They're paying players not to play here, right? They had $30 million in dead money. If they didn't think a coach could coach, they would get rid of him in a second. And I know there's a precedent for them keeping coaches, coordinators, but when it got really bad with Kevin Gilbride, for example, they fired him as their offensive coordinator. I just think that is such an unbelievable insult to the Steelers, an undeserved one. And man, if it was true, and I was a Steeler fan, that they kept Matt Canada despite doubts to honor 1 year of his contract, I would never root for them again. I refuse to believe it.
Yeah, I'm right on with you. By the way, I just Googled real quick. Piddling and piddly are both words, just like incrinculate should be a word.
I like that.
But
I like that.
But more to your point, the Steelers, I think some of this stems from the conversation that always gets poked up at some point when the Steelers lose a game. Well, they have the cheapest coaching staff in the NFL, and it's clearly because they don't. Well, the Rooneys are cheap, and they want to pay. You think the Rooneys are cheap with how much money that they've spent on this organization? How much money? How much time and investment has been made to make the Steelers one of the crown jewel organizations of the NFL? That's where I'm right with you. I think some of that is crazy talk. I also think the entire conversation of the least paid coaching staff, and it's because they have the least amount of coaches. They don't have a billion, assistant coordinators helping them, a pass game coordinator, run game coordinator on top of that. And maybe that's a flaw, maybe, but their philosophy has been, you do not want too many cooks in the kitchen. You want a solid message coming from a consistent source. And when you have a certain amount of coaching staff guys, the message is coming from specific guys, and there's no confusion of any message. That is not being cheap. That's just their method of how they think it's best to work. And maybe they're wrong. There's a billion different ways. We see the Eagles, Niners, Chiefs, and Bengals are all completely different teams that are in the conference championship right now. But they all are in really good cycles of where they are. It just there's not one way. There's not one philosophy to make yourself a winning team.
Exactly. I mean, I think that's well said. There's a difference between criticizing their method and criticizing their will to win, or exactly. Ripping them for being cheap. Listen, we have a team in town that doesn't try to win a lot of the time. that doesn't spend money. The fact, listen, when Brian Flores became available and Mike Tomlin wanted him, seemed to me there was no hesitation. They brought him in and paid him. I think they should have a senior consultant on offense. I've been saying that for several weeks.
I agree with you.
But them not, if they don't bring one in, I would criticize them on the basis of their methods, not on, the Steelers don't want to pay a guy. Come on. No. And by the way, Doug Whaley was on our station recently, who has knowledge of the inner workings. And he said they pay a competitive wage for coordinators. He said if there's criticism on paying coaches, it might be with other coaches on staff. But I don't really have a problem with, for instance, the offensive line coach, or when they've not been satisfied with their offensive line coaches, they seem to move on pretty quickly. But maybe if there's a criticism, it's with coaches below the coordinators. I don't know, man. But when it comes to coordinators and bringing in people like Brian Flores is a great example. I refuse to believe that they're trying to do this on the cheap. I think if anything, they prioritize winning sometimes to a fault, like this year. I wish, if I were a Steeler fan, I wish you could have gotten the two Kenny Pickett comeback games and no other wins. I wish they were sitting here at 3-14 if I were a Steeler fan. Because here's the thing, Chris. Not only did they ruin their draft position, I think they may have also given themselves a false sense of competence when it comes to Matt Canada and maybe some other things that happened.
That's very possible. And hey, if they finish 3-14 or whatever their record would be, if they just tanked for most of the season, then they're in the conversation for guys like Jalen Carter and Will Anderson, and you have your pick of the litter of any one of those superstar defensive players that early on in the season people were like, oh, maybe we could get one of those guys in Pittsburgh, and all that's gone now. You're the 17th pick. Their only hope is if they wanted to trade the 17th and the 32nd pick that they got from the Bears to move up a lot of spots.
Maybe.
But and maybe that's a move. But I think that they're in a really good spot right now where you could get 3 top 50 guys this year, and if you hit on them, at least 2 of them that are early starters, you're getting a lot of that young replenishing youth into your roster right now. That maybe you see something with there. And finishing on Matt Canada before we move on to Kenny, because I want to get your thoughts on him in a minute. But I think it's important. You know, there's a lot of criticisms you can lay about Matt Canada, that's for sure. But I think the Steelers are very knowledgeable of like, look, it wasn't really his offense last year with Ben Roethlisberger. Ben Roethlisberger, Kevin Dotson, Deontay Johnson, they all acknowledged it. Like, look, that was Ben was calling plays. Like that was just it, win or lose, good or bad. That was Ben's offense. This was really Canada's first year. He had a journeyman vet in Mitch Trubisky. He had a makeshift offensive line that started to form in the second half of the season, and injured Najee Harris for the first half, and a rookie quarterback when they kind of pushed Mitch Trubisky to the back. And those aren't excuses for some of the things that didn't work, but the reality is that was not going to be an offense that Andy Reid was going to just come in and just be like, oh yeah, these guys are a top 10 unit this year. I think it's fair to say, hey, if they think that they see something developing there that they should stick with him for another year and move on if it doesn't work after that. But I also agree with you that, you know what? If I'm sitting here and I do think that there's nothing to be built there, that Matt Canada just is never going to be it, you should move on from it. It's clear they don't think that way. We'll find out in a year's time if they're right. I'll get Joe's thoughts on Kenny versus a lot of the quarterbacks we're seeing right now in the NFL, and whether or not Kenny Pickett can get to that status, or if the Steelers need him to be as good as some of those quarterbacks. We'll talk about that in a minute. But first, I got to talk to you guys about Valley Pool and Spa. Wouldn't it be nice as now the snow is kind of coming back in Pittsburgh, if you had a place in your house to have a nice sauna or a spa just to relax in? Well, Valley Pool and Spa is here to make that a reality. You can relax and soak in a hot tub or a swim spa from Valley Pool and Spa, but right before the snow flies again. And you can refresh and rejuvenate in one of their Finleo saunas that is sure to melt your stress away faster than the Frosty in Aruba. Save big now on all in-stock hot tubs, swim spas, and saunas at valleypoolspa.com. Back here on the North Shore Drive podcast, I'm Chris Carter here with Joe Starkey. We're here talking all things Pittsburgh Steelers to start the show. We'll have Andrew Destin talking Penguins after the show, after their riveting overtime win. Joe and I are actually watching that here together.
Yeah.
Just kind of going over. That was kind of crazy. Hey, you know what? We'll break decorum a little bit. What was your thoughts on how the Penguins pulled that out, Joe?
Man, you're going to have all these complaints, and it was fire wagon hockey. It's the middle of January. It stinks outside. It's dark at 3:00. Give me that game. I mean, that's fun. That's entertainment. I don't give a damn about defense. Let's score goals. I loved it.
Hey, I thought it was crazy too, because it was funny. Like because we set our time to record like at a certain time and everything, and then the game was close, and I'm like, well, I should send the invite to Joe, and he's like, it's 6-6, man, and I'm like, yeah, you're all right. So I was more than happy to kind of keep track of the game, but that was kind of crazy. We'll talk with Andrew Destin more about that, but I want to get back to some football stuff here with Joe. Joe, Kenny Pickett finished with those two riveting comebacks at the end of the season, and there were signs all throughout the year that when he was starting to put it together, when he was starting to see the field, he was making really good decisions and some really accurate throws and limiting the interceptions and the big mistakes that we saw early in the part of the season. So we saw real growth from him. But is Kenny Pickett a guy who could develop into the kind of quarterback with some of the teams that we're seeing in the playoffs right now? Because it's funny, in the conferences, I think there's a clear divide. You have Joe Burrow, who right now people are comparing to Tom Brady with how he's playing for the Bengals right now in just his third year in the NFL. You have Patrick Mahomes, who is he's the second coming. He is everyone's crowned him as the number one quarterback in the NFL. On the NFC side, you have Jalen Hurts, who many would push for the MVP conversation, but I think a lot of people would agree, like, hey, like he's playing very well this year, but he doesn't do what Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow, and those guys they do different things. And what he does is great, but it's more to the scheme of how the Eagles want to play their game. And then, of course, you have Brock Purdy, who is literally Mr. Irrelevant in his rookie season, just out there wheeling and dealing with a Niners offense that runs the football, blocks really well, and gives them some really good targets to throw to in Kittle and Deebo Samuel. Purdy aside, do you see Kenny Pickett as a guy that can bang with those guys, or is he kind of more of like, hey, we got the kind of the good manager quarterback who will play above average, kind of like Derek Carr-ish, Andy Dalton-ish, and that the Steelers will have to rely on great players around him to push them forward?
Well, I think Mahomes, Burrow are in a class by themselves. I think they're the top two guys. I think Jalen Hurts is really good, and I would love to see Pickett be able to I think so much of quarterback play that isn't talked about enough is, can you process the game? Can you run the offense that you're being asked to run and make quality decisions throughout the game? Can you identify things at the line of scrimmage? Jalen Hurts has just taken over that offense.
Yes, he has.
And there were games this season where he just ran it perfectly all the time. And if Kenny Pickett, let's hope they have the kind of offense with a coordinator who gives him the right kind of plan each week. Man, if he can do what Jalen Hurts does every week and just master an offense and torture people like that, I'd be real happy with that. I don't know that you're going to get the pure, talent and people talking about you as an all-time player like they already are with Burrow and Mahomes. I'd take a Jalen Hurts in a second.
I'm very with you here, and especially on the reading the field part. I love Jalen Hurts, especially when he got benched for Tua. He didn't leave Alabama right away. He stuck around. Then when Tua got hurt the next year, he comes in, wins them the SEC championship, keeps their national championship hopes alive that year. And then the next year he goes to Oklahoma, makes them a national contender, and gets them to the playoffs. And then you see what he's doing at the Eagles. I saw a very similar fight from Kenny Pickett in my time covering Pitt. I saw him read the field. He never had the strongest arm. He was never the fastest. He didn't have every tool in the box, but he did put together maybe the best package that you saw in his final year in college football, and that's why he was the first quarterback off the board that year. And I think you're seeing that kind of start to be put together for the Steelers. Our own Brian Batko wrote a piece about how Kenny Pickett has his nook in the locker room with Harry. He just studies film relentlessly. They get out of practice, everyone else is stretching and kind of just changing out of their clothes, hitting the shower. He's in his locker just going over film of what he did, what his opponent did, and how he needs to get better. If the Steelers can have that guy, because as great as Ben was never the cerebral quarterback who knew everything, who knew everything and knew where everyone would be at all times and could pick you apart consistently. He had his really hot days, and if he saw what you were doing, he would sling it, and it was tough to stop him when he did that. But if the Steelers get a guy who consistently wins with that cerebral level of play, I think it puts Kenny Pickett in the conversation of, he may not have some of the prettiest deep balls in the NFL like Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes and Joe Burrow and those guys. But if he's able to dissect you the way that Jalen Hurts does with the Eagles, if he's able to kind of move the ball and take advantage of your weaknesses and defenses because he studies you the way he did, especially in his last year at Pitt, it makes the Steelers a problem. And then with all the playmakers that they have, if they continue to mature, Najee Harris, George Pickens, Deontay Johnson, Pat Freiermuth, Jalen Warren, those guys, I think it makes their offense enough of a problem that if the defense can get back to, they were top 10 this year, if they can get back to top 5, the Steelers then are a force to be reckoned with in the NFL.
The potential is there. There's no doubt. I mean, there were a couple things that bothered me, and I don't know if they were more Pickett related or Canada related. The one thing that just jumps off the page to me is Canada came here or was elevated into this position with the idea that he was a big play action guy. That was a big thing he did at Pitt. And they started to run the ball over the final 10 games, and yet their play action usage was at the bottom of the league. Like, what are we doing here? If you're running the ball, you're supposed to be throwing play action. I think Pickett somewhere had a comment, or maybe it was somebody commenting on him, that he's not all that comfortable, especially behind center, running play action. So was it him or Canada? But if they're not going to be able to do that, then they're going to have problems. I mean, you talk about what the Eagles do. They're running, they're running spread option stuff with him. They're doing play action all over the place. They can do anything. The Eagles and Hurts can beat you any which way you want, but make no mistake, play action in whatever form is a huge part of their offense. It has to be here. I don't understand why it wasn't more a part of it. Do you? Late in the year?
So the explanation that you were alluding to was that Kenny Pickett was doing so much with his eyes to see the field that calling play action, especially from coming under center, meant that he would have to turn his back to the defense and then turn back around and then have to make quick decisions. And that there was a sense of you didn't want to put him in that spot because he was using his eyes so much to kind of decipher what was going on. And he wasn't at the point where he could trust things to just play out and then quickly assess once he turns around what is going on behind him after he finishes the play fake. I believe that's what's going on. But I'm right with you. If that was the reason this year, okay, rookie quarterback, that's what he's getting used to. But Kenny Pickett said, I'm already working with Matt Canada to, on trying to develop for next year. That has to be in the top three things that they're working on, because I agree with you entirely. If the Steelers offensive line, which I think will get reinforcements in this offseason, continues to get better, if Najee Harris and Jalen Warren continue to be a 1-2 punch that makes you a serious rushing threat, you have to capitalize on it with play action. And if you do, it makes it so that you don't have to be, the Bengals with 4 different wide receivers and a tight end that threaten you at all times. You don't have to be the Bills who just air it out to Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis all the time, or Patrick Mahomes throwing it to Travis Kelce. You can be an offense that is balanced like the Eagles, like the Niners too. Brock Purdy isn't out there running, deciphering defenses left and right. He's getting a lot of play action looks because teams are looking for Christian McCaffrey. If the Steelers can get to that point, like you're saying, like I'm saying, I think that Kenny Pickett's got something. So that might be the biggest key for both him and Canada right now, is make sure play action is a huge staple of this offense in 2023.
Yeah, and it's a little bit disturbing that if they can do it in San Fran with Mr. Irrelevant, who also got no run with the ones, he was just tossed in there the same way Pickett was.
Yep.
Then why not here? So that part's, a little bit disturbing, and I'll be curious to see how it plays out. And then, it's just going to be more time and games that we get to observe Pickett. Is he that guy? I'm encouraged. It looks like to me that this was the best move Mike Tomlin's made in a long, long, long time. Because if you get the quarterback right, then you can afford to get some other things wrong. If you get that right, man, that's, people were fearful that we'd see another quarter century without the right guy, like we did between Bradshaw and Ben. And if they made the right move immediately, wow,
that'd be crazy. That'd be crazy and a huge statement for the franchise if they were able to. We'll continue to monitor that here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Thank you, Joe, for joining us.
Thank you.
Here on the North Shore Drive podcast. Don't go away though, fans, because we got Andrew Destin coming up. He's going to give us a recap and some Penguins talk after that crazy 6-5 7-6. Excuse me. That's how crazy that got, Joe. I was just sitting there thinking, oh, okay, now it's over. No, it's not. It's going to overtime. Great, and then they win 7-6. We're going to go over that game over the Panthers and what the Penguins proved in that. But first, we got to talk to you guys about Yins in the Berg.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Joe. With the Steelers campaign, maybe being all said and done, that's totally fine. But the Penguins, you see them heating up right now, and you see their game right now. They're trying to make a playoff push. What better way to support them by getting some Penguins gear from Yins in the Berg, the #1 place to get all Pittsburgh sports apparel and accessories. You can also get Steelers gear, Pirates gear, Pitt gear, anything Pittsburgh sports that you can think of. You can get right there at Yins in the Berg. And where's Yins in the Berg? They got 2 stores in the Strip District that you can visit at any point in time. And then on top of that, you can go on their website, yinserspgh.com. That's yinserspgh.com. Every week, new merchandise hitting their website. Go check out Yins in the Berg at yinserspgh.com or their stores in the Strip District. Trust me, you won't regret it when you check out all the amazing Pittsburgh sports apparel, accessories, and much, much more. Back here on the North Shore Drive podcast, Chris Carter here as your host as always. But we switched from Joe Starkey to our man Andrew Destin, who was on site for the Penguins' ridiculous 7-6 overtime win over the Florida Panthers. It was looking gloom for a little bit there. There was a lot of worry about, oh man, because this is one of the teams that's chasing them in the playoffs as the current 8th seed. But then you see Letang just going off for 2 goals and 2 assists on the night, including the game winner in overtime. Andrew, though, this has been an incredible comeback for Letang for all the things that have happened to this man, health wise, personal life wise, tragic wise. And he comes back, his first game back, and he does this. Can you walk our listeners through everything that Kris Letang went through to get back to this moment?
Yeah, right. I mean, it's hard to say that any moment in January is a storybook ending, but it sure felt like that after the game last night. And the reason is because you said it there, Chris. I mean, this has been arguably one of the toughest months of Kris Letang's career, life, not to speak for him, but you go back to the end of November, beginning of December, misses 2 weeks after suffering the second stroke of his career. Already had one close to a decade ago, goes into cardiac arrest, misses significant time there. And then he comes back, and that's an emotional moment when he returned to the team in mid-December. But sure enough, 2 weeks later, then he suffers a lower body injury, gets nicked up, and it felt like right after that, then his father passes away in Montreal. So Letang misses significant time with the second stroke of his career, then has the injury, father passes away, leaves the team for a brief period of time, and comes back a few days ago, practices with the team for a little bit, and makes the return. And what a return it was, because Letang it's such a different element when he's on the ice for the team. Such an offensive-minded defenseman from that blue line, somebody who really pushes the tempo. And with that comes the downfalls, right, where you can open up some offensive opportunities for the other side. But sure made for an entertaining hockey game, that's for sure. You don't see too many contests where there's 13 goals, but can't say enough about how impressive of a return that was for Letang. 2 goals. The first one, kudos to Brian Dumoulin on a great pass, finding Letang, who then just kind of had to saucer it toward the net. But then the second one there, I mean, point blank, lines up for it and just beats his man in net. It's a beautiful thing to see. And it was a fantastic hockey night and a great way for Letang to cap it off, given everything he's gone through.
Certainly looked like that from just watching on television, just the crowd reacting and the craziness of that game. What was the vibe in the locker room like afterwards? Like, you get that awesome moment, and then as close as this core has been for so long, like I can't imagine the emotion that they had for their friend and teammate with Letang when he comes back into the locker room and they're kind of just reveling in that moment.
Yeah, it was twofold. One was relief, just because, I mean, 2 nights earlier, the team thought it deserved 2 points in New Jersey, and then, you could say got robbed of it in the sense that they went to overtime, and overtime has been such a backbreaker for the Penguins this year. So relief is the first word that comes to mind for me. But the other was just such a mood of, this is so much bigger than hockey. And I think Crosby put it best afterward. A couple of us went to go talk to him, and he's like, 58's over there. And he's pointing to Letang, and we're all like, well, the scrum was pretty big. We couldn't get in for that one. But, it was just, I think everybody was so glad that Kris had the moment that he did, the moments that he did, really, and to have him back on the ice, back with the team. He really is. I mean, where's VA? He's one of the team leaders of this group. Somebody who this team, it's not the same when he's not there. And if they're going to make a run to the playoffs, if they're going to make a postseason push, they need him firing on all cylinders. But I think that's not what last night was about. I think last night was about that, this is bigger than hockey. And, this team with the sacrifices they made, I think it was after the Arizona Coyotes game when they were playing out in Phoenix, the team, instead of flying right back home when they had to play the Vancouver Canucks 2 days later, they flew to Montreal to be there for Letang's father's funeral. So the team has been there with him. Mike Sullivan talked about that this has been affecting everybody. This has been all parties involved. So, it sounds cliche, but truly this has been bigger than hockey. And I think everybody in the locker room kind of recognized that yesterday and was relieved to get a win, not only for the sake of getting 2 points in overtime, but from a standpoint of getting it for Letang.
Absolutely. Now, let's take a step back from the night overall, because I think this was also a great way for the Penguins to kind of fight back in a situation they had been down. They recently lost to Ottawa in a 1-on-1 that they had with them, and then they're coming into this game. This wasn't a must win, but in my eyes, I was like, man, like you really want to set a better tone going into the All-Star break that's coming up. And a win like this, I think, is really helpful, especially against the Panthers team that's chasing you for that last playoff spot right now. And again, playoffs are still months away, but I think this team wants to head into that sort of break feeling a lot better, and that way when they're resting, they're coming back, they're going to be charged up and ready to go for a good push. But did you see anything sustainable from this group in this win? Like, getting 7 goals isn't always going to happen, but was there anything when you were watching the game, like, man, like, this is, with Letang back in there, there's an identity that this team can embrace that can beat some of the better teams in hockey?
Yeah, 2 words: power play. It came back. It came back alive, and that's no disrespect to Ty Smith, but when he was in there filling in for Letang as the quarterback of that top power play unit, it just wasn't the same, and the results showed that. Matt Vensel wrote about that a couple of days ago, and Ty Smith had some good moments while he was in the starting lineup. Now a healthy scratch the last few games, but come on, Kris Letang's been running this power play unit for a decade plus, and he was back in there. They go 3 for 5. That's no coincidence. When he's out there, the comfort level that he has with Gino, with Crosby, it's unparalleled. These guys have been doing it for forever. So yeah, they're aging. Yeah, they're getting up there in years, but that presence, Letang back on the blue line, not to beat a dead horse and keep talking about him, but the power play unit has been one of the strengths of the Penguins and wasn't the last month or so, and that's no coincidence. Letang wasn't out there. With his presence on that power play unit again, combining that with Crosby starting to come to light with goals in the last 2 games, Malkin has had a tremendous month trying to help the team out as they push through this tough period. That's something that legitimately is a sign of, hey, this is a unit that really could help the team come playoff time. And you mentioned it's early still, it's January, but having that team firing on all cylinders from the power play, that's huge, because that was a unit that really, during that excellent streak at the end of November and beginning of December, I think it was a 7-8 game winning streak. That point, special teams was tremendous. The penalty kill was great. And now you get some guys like a Ryan Poehling returning to the lineup who are key on that front. So special teams, and specifically the power play, looked much improved over the last 2 games. And that's key for this Penguins team, because they need them to be doing well in addition to the 5-on-5 play. And I think that's something that's sustainable, and that's something to truly feel optimistic about.
I hear you on that. I absolutely do hear you on that. I think it's going to be I think that when you see the Penguins, when I saw the Penguins, and I didn't even think about the specific power play being back, but because it was weird, because I felt like this is how it's supposed to be when they're playing on special teams. And
right.
I guess in my sense, I'm like, I'm forgetting a lot of the times this year where it's struggled, and it has been. The statistics have shown that all year long. But if they can get back to the level where the power play is a factor for them, maybe that's a boost in some of those games that they were losing over the past stretch of a month and a half or so, where they've kind of fallen down to this part. If they can do that, I think it's going to be interesting. They got the Capitals Thursday night, I believe.
Yep. In
So
DC.
that's gonna be a big game for them to kind of come in there against their rivals and see if they can hold up against them. We'll see how that happens. I believe our friend Matt Vensel will be on site for that one. That's going to be an exciting one. We'll talk with him for the Friday episode of the North Shore podcast, recapping what happened there as the Penguins continue their jaunt back, and we'll see what happens. But Andrew, thank you so much for joining us here and giving us your recap here. We appreciate all the great work you do for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Check out Andrew's work at post-gazette.com, where you can check out all the work from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette and all the coverage that we have on the Penguins this season. Thanks again to Andrew, and thank you for checking us out here on the North Shore Drive podcast. I've been your host, Chris Carter. We had Joe Starkey and Andrew Destin on today. We'll be back Friday with more on all things Pittsburgh sports right here from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette on the North Shore Drive podcast. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you're watching this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. For 6 months of digital access to post-gazette.com for just $6, click the link down below in the description.